and welcome to our first Operations Nation event. I hope everything is working everywhere, no tech problems or anything. So tonight we'll be talking to you about the role of a finance team. This is the first event in a series of 5 themed finance for ops. So first of all, I would like to go over some housekeeping on how we're going to use Zoom for this panel event tonight, although I'm pretty sure everyone is used to Zoom by now, but you can use the chat function to say hi to the attendees, to the panelists, and maybe raising technical issues if you have those as well. And we'll be using the Q&A to collect your questions so that we'll keep them all in one place. And please submit your questions throughout the discussion. I see that there's already a couple, or at least there was one already in there. But this will also enable you to comment or to upvote a question from your fellow attendees as well. And then we'll answer them in the last half hour of this event. So I'm sorry. This evening, I'll tell you a bit more about Operations Nation or ON, and then I'll pass the torch to Ju-Vern to tell about Quantico, her reason for accepting to do this, introing our lovely panel, and finally get to the real reason why we're all here, which is a discussion. We're aiming for it to take about 45 minutes, but that's obviously subject to how much there's to talk about and how many questions you're submitting. And as I mentioned before, we're intending for that to be from 7 till 7:30. So a little more about Operations Nation. Charlene, Ashrina, and I have been incredibly lucky to have found each other because we quickly realized we all have a passion for the same thing. There's just not enough out there for people in operations and startups. We've been joking that the same 2 books for COOs has been popping up on Amazon for years. That's not changed. Or when you Google anything to do with operations, they think you're looking for military strategic advice. Not that sometimes it doesn't feel like we need exactly that, but you know, we operations people aren't spoiled with content that is catered to us specifically, and we're not just bothered by that, but we want to change that. So after quite a few discussions and realizing we're aligned with our views, we decided to take the leap. We're starting a platform for ops people by ops people. A place that you can call your own and a place that is known as a one-stop shop for ops people. Now, please don't take a sip every time I say ops people because you won't be able to follow along with the discussion after this. So ON currently looks like a landing page where you can sign up for the newsletter, an active LinkedIn page, and an Eventbrite page where you can stay informed or notified on our upcoming events. We have many plans, but you'll just have to follow us closely to see everything that we have in store for you. So why are we kicking off with Finance for Ops? One of our pillars as Operations Nation or ON is education. We feel of COVID-19, it's never been more important for ops leaders to keep an eye on finances of your business. Whether finance is a part of your role or you're interested in understanding finance better to empower yourself or make better strategic decisions, it's essential knowledge, a great asset and a necessary tool in the belt of any ops person. This is why we wanted to open with this and this to be our first event. Also, we couldn't be luckier than to have Ju-Vern See, co-founder of Quantico, accept our invitation to lead on this series and be tonight's moderator. So Ju-Vern, over to you.
Great, thanks Astrid. And I definitely have an affinity, I suppose, towards like ops people, I guess. Like soon after I left KPMG, I was head of finance and ops at Rotiki. And I completely read like, you know, the whole like learning things until you're good enough and then passing it on to the experts is something I can definitely relate to. I had to learn how to do sales and product, of which I'm not very good at, but like, you know, I enjoyed it. And I definitely understand like why lots of ops people as well, like would love to just learn a little bit about finance and then in a way hack it. I feel like that's the word I've seen quite a lot as well, hacking finance. Although I'm sure our panelists would have different views on that. I'm sure we'll get to that later. So I guess really quickly about, Quantico, kind of what we do. We're all about delivering world-class finance teams to rapidly scaling businesses. So I've worked in lots of startups and, you know, I've struggled to work with accounting firms who, you know, could was really great at compliance, but not necessarily great at actually providing the commercial expertise and the kind of operations expertise. And we firmly believe as well, there's no need to hire just the one person full time and expect them to do everything. And what we instead provide is a mix of skill sets supported by unlimited access to our own methodology and also subject matter experts. And that's kind of in short what we do. So I guess let's now introduce the panelist, I suppose. So Julie, whom I've had the chance to meet when she was still at Monzo and was at Receipt Bank at that time, because we were both having similar pains, basically implementing a new accounting system. So I'll let Julie kind of share a few words, I suppose, about herself before I move on to Lambro and Prakash. Go for it.
Hi, yes, I'm Julie. I'm currently finance director at WeGift. So my background is all finance, mostly in financial services, and the last 7 or so years in fintech specifically. I moved to the UK about just over 3 years now. And so when I got here, I just spent a few years in SF, and I was just really taken into the tech industry. Really love small companies where you have a lot more autonomy. You get so much more exposure to all the different areas of business, which is, I know, what you're all experiencing as well. So when I got here, I was just looking at fintech specifically, found myself at Monzo. We grew the finance team from 3 to almost 40 at the point when I left. So when I got to that big, I realized there was 1,500 people across the company altogether. And so then I just started looking for something smaller, wanted to go back a couple of steps in the company life cycle, and found myself at WeGift, which is a digital incentives platform, essentially B2B SaaS, distributing gift card vouchers for various use cases. And yeah, so hopefully can share some experience on scaling teams.
Great, thanks so much, Julie, for the introduction. And Lambro, again, like I met Lambro for the very first time when we were still sort of, I think you may have just left industry at the time at KPMG, and I was at KPMG about to make my first move. So I was obviously looking at Lambro, being quite jealous about, like working in startups. And I think since then, Lambro has been working with a whole host of different startups. Wonderly, previously Lost My Name, and then right now, currently as a portfolio CFO with a few different companies. So I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, so trained at KPMG, as Ju-Vern said, and I went into some very kind of big companies in the industry like Tesco, Molton Brown, the soap people, but it's actually backed by a Japanese PLC called Cow Brands. And from there, I kind of went to progressively smaller, more entrepreneurial companies. So did a 6-month contract role at Headspace, which was fantastic, great company, great sort of mission. And then from there, went on to take the head of finance role at Wonderbly, which at the time was called Lost My Name. That's a children's personalized publishing company. And then from there, I kind of went into portfolio CFO work, taking on a number of clients. One of those clients actually scaled into a full-time role, as they often do. That was my drive, where that was my most recent full-time role. And I had the dual kind of COO, CFO mantle. So yeah, hopefully I can kind of add some commentary and some insights, wearing both hats today.
Great, thanks, Lambro. And last but not least, Prakash. And Prakash has done lots of different things. He was previously at Deloitte, and then he's went and worked in a few different banks and hedge funds. And right now he's a tech startup portfolio CFO with a variety of companies. So obviously lots of experience there. I'm sure there's lots of great insights that you can share with us, having worked in quite large businesses and also in kind of entrepreneurial-led businesses as well. So Prakash, why don't you go for it? You're muted, by the way.
Not paying attention. Good start. So basically, I qualified from Deloitte many years ago. Went to work in the city as a fund manager and an analyst. Then worked at Nomura, Barclays, M&G. Then graduated from fund management into hedge funds. So I was a trader and a fund manager for UBS in the hedge fund arm, and I ran the European options equities desk at JP Morgan. I left the last time the world ended, which was 2008, 2009, as opposed to this time when the world's ended. And I've been working in various companies as a finance person, head of finance, FD, so varies from e-commerce to marketplaces to SaaS businesses. And currently I work with a couple of businesses, one called Trafi, which is a multimodal mass mobility as a service platform provider, and also a company called Total Control Pro, which is a a business providing control software to industry in terms of improving their processes and its cost savings. And also I work with a company called Funky Kids, which is a very small piano teaching business for young children. So yeah, whole host and wide range. And I'm just actually laughing at the picture that you've lifted there because it looks absolutely nothing like it. So it's very good.
Yeah, I did say, Prakash, at the start of the recording that, you know, if I saw you on the street today, I just would not have recognized you. So obviously you're growing a really nice coronavirus beard there. So well done.
Absolutely. Lockdown Santa. Yeah.
No, yeah, not everyone can do it. I can definitely attest to that. Great. So as you heard from the panelists, like, you know, they've got a great range of experience. I'm sure there'll be lots that we can hear from them. So I guess let's kick it off, I suppose. And like the first question I wanted to kind of get started actually is basically, what does finance in startups even mean? Like, you know, what is it that a finance team in startups do and like, you know, and is responsible for? And I also then like to hear like a slightly related question to that. What is it that finance and startups don't do? I think it's a fairly controversial question, so I might get Prakash to lead on this one first.
Okay, fine. The answer to basically what of finance, it depends on the stage of the startup, right? So the bigger the startup gets, I think the more pigeonholed people become into finance as we take on other roles. And I think it's very similar with a lot of the ops people. In early stage startups, finance people tend to do everything. As we get bigger, we tend to have fingers in every pie, but we don't tend to do all the work. So what we tend to look at is, I mean, I think in an early stage, whether you're a finance hire or whether you're an ops hire, it's all hands on deck. Everyone will do everything they possibly can and everything to make the company succeed and do well. As the company gets bigger and starts to scale and you start to hire for specific roles, you know, as a finance person, what I've tended to do is step back and allow other people to run their special. I mean, the way to think about this is like, you know, Robinson Crusoe, Man Friday. Robinson Crusoe's on his own. He gets Man Friday in, becomes doubly as efficient. So, you know, I'm not an HR specialist, even though I've had to lead HR. I'm not necessarily an ops specialist, even though I had to lead ops. So once we've got those people in, you know, it's time to step back and then focus on giving them the budget, discussing the budgets with them, and letting those guys run their specialties. So it's also a question of, I guess, one, being able to get involved and get hands dirty in a lot of different pies in the same way that ops people do, but also knowing when to step back and allowing those people to, the new hires and the special hires, to go and lead their own teams.
No, that's super helpful. So basically what you're saying there is like at the very early stage, you know, basically finance is quite a generalist kind of role and then specializing. So yeah. Lambro or Julie, do you have anything else to add on that? Lambro, you go for it?
No, I think, you know, having worked in very big companies, you know, clearly the roles are far more specialized and your remit is far more narrow. And I think that's what attracts a lot of people to startups, not just finance folk. Your role will inevitably be quite multifaceted from day one. And I think where I've tended to play with my jobs has been more kind of pre-seed through to Series A, Series B. So definitely the stage where you're wearing lots and lots of hats. But I have also seen, you know, processes started to creep in and roles starting to specialize. But I haven't ridden a startup all the way through to mature yet to give you the full kind of loop of the cycle.
Great. And Julie, I guess, again, like we're hearing quite similar things from Lambro, I guess. Would you have anything else to add specifically on what finance does not do? If there is such a thing, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing, like everyone just does everything, right? So again, like where I am now, it's the smallest company I've been at, 30 people. So we do everything through to company secretarial work, like registering on company's house and all that kind of stuff, all the legal side of things. Risk and fraud falls under us as well. I think thinking about it, you can probably divide finance essentially into 3 core silos. Like you have finance operations, which might look at invoicing, cash payments and things. You have accounting and reporting, which is where you do need more technical finance people because you have to be accounting compliant. And that's the area that can get outsourced quite easily. And then, you know, as you're maybe like past seed stage, you want to also start having people that can think about finance, think about financial strategy. So I think, yeah, like as we said, like depending just on what stage you're at, you might have these things in-house or outsourced, but these are all things that will develop, and people, more especially people, will come in as the company gets bigger.
The list of what they don't do, Ju-Vern, I think at the beginning it's quite a small list, but I think that probably includes things like, you know, external facing product development, tech development, but as I say, there's probably not a hell of a lot beyond that you know, a finance person doesn't necessarily touch.
Yeah, and actually,
I would sales.
Yeah,
you don't know.
I was just going to say, yeah, finance people typically won't be your salespeople, right?
Yeah, you say tech development, but actually I think finance has quite an important role to play there as well, because like if you imagine, like I find that actually when we go into new businesses, like oftentimes like because finance and ops I guess haven't been involved, like the kind of invoicing system is all over the place. You actually consider what the repercussions are. The product and tech team have gone ahead and built something that works really well for the customers, and they kind of forgot about like things like cash reconciliation. You know, like great, we've invoiced all these people. What about cash? You know, so perhaps even that I would argue like tech development, maybe sales, maybe. But even that, like sales invoicing, you know, we're very obviously very close to it, definitely. Okay, great. So, and then that kind of brings us on quite nicely to the next kind of I say area to cover, I suppose, but this interaction between finance and ops, I guess. So, obviously there's lots of, like we ran a survey for every attendee of the webinar, and there were lots of questions from the ops community, specifically around, you know, when is the right time to hire someone in finance. So as you can imagine, for a lot of people here, like finance naturally falls under the remit. So they may be head of ops or operations manager. They might not yet have, you know, a kind of finance specialist. And I also completely get that it's quite common for ops team as well at the start to be quite scrappy, you know, as the company scales. So to kickstart, I guess, I would love to hear like your experiences working with ops teams, and especially if you've been the first finance person where previously, you know, finance was covered either by ops themselves or like actually directly by the management team. And to get your views on like what it was like was it smooth sailing? Was it difficult? And to kickstart the conversation, I thought, Julie, you might have lots of things to share on that front, because I'm sure like the journey at Monzo was pretty crazy. So I'm sure you've got lots of experiences there.
Yeah, I'd say because I've been in financial services and Monzo being a bank, there was always a finance person from day one. So like for Monzo, the CFO is one of the co-founders. So I'd say I've been lucky that I've never been like the absolute first person. And so typically in a lot of the companies I've been in, we interact a lot with operations, because like you alluded to, like both finance and ops typically are seen as sort of like back office, like pick up the dirt kind of teams. Like you said, like people will produce products, we release them to the customers, but there's not much thought about like who will actually maintain these afterwards, who will make sure the transactions happen, who will make sure the cash is in the right place later. And it just happens to fall into ops or finance, just whoever happens to pick it up at that point in time. So I do think like finance and ops are like kindred spirits, and there's a lot of similarities in how we operate. I'd say a lot of the ops people that I've worked with, they've typically had a very kind of general understanding of finance, but yeah, they don't necessarily know the ins and outs of it, which is why we're in the company. But what I found usually most helpful working with ops is kind of looking at the cost of servicing and like the cost of the services that ops provide. And that typically leads into something that we call like customer unit economics, which is a common metric for investors to look at. But I find it quite useful because it means that finance really gets to understand specifically what ops does, how ops works, and then be able to help put together data around essentially the productivity, the efficiency, and how it basically falls in under the profit and loss of the company as well. And then using that information, we usually work together with ops to figure out like where there's opportunities for efficiency, and to create business cases for if ops does need, for example, more tech support to scale their departments and things like that. So like I said, it's quite common, I think, for ops people to not have a great financial understanding, but just working together, like I've basically helped train people up through conversations and discussions on the finance side and how we look at their department. And then obviously I'm learning from ops as well in terms of how you operate, how you do things. And I feel like that's like then working towards a strategy of how to scale our teams is usually where we find like the biggest connection together.
Definitely. So what I'm hearing here is basically that, like there's a lot of collaboration between finance and ops, and where finance can really add value is providing a bit more of the technical analysis, I guess, kind of the more in-depth look, like how to efficient, how to cut down costs, but actually how to operate that, or how to put that, how to actually do it. I suppose that's definitely ops, I suppose, whereas finance leads in just getting the data and just kind of putting it,
helping to interpret it, in a way that VCs will like to see it.
Yeah, great. Prakash, what's your view on that? What's your experience like working with ops people?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important in a startup that when the most important thing that any startup has is the people that it hires, right? So when you hire people, they have to be able to work together. So with finance and with ops, it's really important that there has to be an understanding between the two, because I think they're the two departments potentially that are the closest and most tightly linked across a business, because it applies across everything. So ops people get involved in absolutely everything in the same way that finance people do. One of the things that I would say, however, is that one of the biggest issues that I've always faced in businesses when I've joined them as the first finance hire or the first senior finance hire is having to unpick things that have been done really badly. And no offense to the people who have done ops, and I've done ops myself, and I've probably done ops very badly, right? So an ops person has had to come in and then fix my mistakes that I've not done particularly well. But the problem is with finance mistakes is that where you don't have the systems in place and where you don't have the processes in place, it's very difficult. It's not difficult, but it's a very time-consuming job to come in and unpick things and then reformulate it and get everyone in the business to relearn how to process really simple stuff like transactions, really simple stuff like processing invoices, all of this kind of stuff, and expense claims, all of this stuff which is done really badly but could be done really efficiently if a finance person, a specialist, had been involved in an earlier phase of the business. And one of those things that I think a lot of ops teams and a lot of businesses, because they see finance as a cost structure as opposed to a strategic partner in growth, tend to focus on it as a cost, and therefore, let's hire finance last. But I would actually argue that you're probably better off, rather than wasting your own ops time doing finance stuff, or getting the CEO or the COO or head of ops or whoever involved in finance matters that are going to take up 3, 4, 5 days a month of time. Right at the beginning, when you do this, it's actually better to hire a part-time resource. And I'm not saying you necessarily need to go to a CFO level, but hire a part-time FC. There are lots of FCs out there who are part-time. There are lots of CFOs out there who are part-time and who would work at a portfolio like Lambro, myself. And I'm not doing this to plug in any way, because I'm inundated right now. But I think the thing is to get those specialists in and to take it out of your headspace. Because if you're an ops person, get a finance person in who can do it properly, or get a finance person in part-time to show you how to do it properly, and then you run the system. So yeah, that's what I would say. But I think that it is very important that all bits of the business, especially in the smaller startups, the sort of the Venn diagram, the areas where they cross over is very, very large in the early stages. We tend to separate out a little bit as we get bigger, but even then, that interaction, I think, between finance and ops is actually going to be pretty key for the whole business, because that's where the finance guys are probably the steward of the investor's cash, whereas the ops guys are the ones who actually go out and deploy. So in that respect, I think that link is pretty important for any business.
I guess to play devil's advocate here, like you talk about how bringing in finance specialists would basically save lots of time in the future. Mm-hmm. Basically, like get the experts in, because you're just going to be wasting time, trying to sort all these things out that should be best left, I guess, to like the finance experts, I guess. So I guess my follow-up question would be what specific processes have you seen in the past that's been so broken that you've had to come in to fix it? Because let's just use examples like expenses claims, for example, right? As one process, I guess. Like I say, to play devil's advocate, it's what's so difficult about that? I mean, it's just expenses.
Well, it's not difficult, right? So that's the whole point. The point is I mean, you know very well, because obviously you worked at Receipt Bank, right? So Receipt Bank's whole raison d'etre is to sort that problem out. Now, where you have an ops person and things are being filed on paper, So there are a couple of businesses I've worked at. One especially comes to mind. They were printing, taking their expenses, photocopying it. Then it was coming into the office perfectly normally on a phone, as an image on a phone. It was coming into the office, and then someone else in the office was printing those out, right? And printing them out and stamping them and requiring a signature of approval from somebody. And, that kind of stuff, first of all, it's a horrible waste of paper, right? But beyond that, it's just a ridiculously nonsensical process, right? Why would you add layers to a process where you don't need one? And this is, things like Receipt Bank, things like, Zero Expenses, Expensify, all of these things are really, really simple products, simple processes, and integrate into your finance system, integrate into your account systems. And, you don't need this. You don't need this problem. And I've, having to unpick that behavior then, where, people come into the business, or salespeople are submitting expenses, and they're used to submitting like 200 expense claims by photograph into an email address, having them then to relearn and reteach like 25 people, and then sort out the errors that come as a result of that, is a massive pain in the backside. So, you just don't want to do it. And it can be, and that's just a very simplistic exercise. Yes, expenses are really simple. When you're talking about things like, the legal side of stuff, and like the finance strategy and the modeling, building these massively complex models that are just nonsensical. Again, when you could do this, there's so many areas that you just want to leave to somebody who can do it, and do it quicker and better.
I tend to agree with Prakash, but I think the risk level of expense claims being filed incorrectly is kind of a lot lower than a cash flow model blowing up. And I think for me, one of the sort of key issues I see is, businesses not necessarily having a grip on their working capital and their cash flow cycles, particularly, e-commerce businesses that are working on sort of 52-week, 445 type cycles. And I think, unless you have a good sort of financial grounding, it's quite a tall order to produce something like that that's kind of accurate and can be used to actually run the business. So I think for that kind of thing, the risk level multiplies, and it might be that you kind of completely mistime your cash out position, or indeed when you need to go and buy new stock. So I think for me, it's kind of focusing on the riskier things first and trying to kind of get those into a better place.
And I guess that brings me on nicely to my next question, I guess, like we've talked a bit about like how like obviously ops and finance can work together, and all of us have actually joined, well, most of us have actually joined like a startup, kind of being the first finance person as well, and have had the experience. So what's the trigger point then, like at what point do you think like startups should be looking to hire someone in finance? Where previously they've had ops people. So I know Julie said like she's not really had experience. I guess being a bank, means that like you kind of almost have to have
the requirement. Yeah.
Like it makes sense if you have to like actually legally register as a bank. But like but I would like to hear from Lambro, I guess, like what do you think are the trigger points? Is it company size? Is it headcount, complexity? I mean, it's not going to be a straightforward answer, but we'd love to get
there's definitely not a one size fits all on this. I think there's things like the level of financial literacy of the exec team. So are they kind of mainly product people? Do they understand the basic terminology around P&L, balance sheet? I think it's the industry the company's in. Does it have like sort of more kind of compliance burden than an average company? How fast is it growing? What's the volume of transactions? I think it's almost like coming up with a scorecard of factors. I think the real acid test is, if you're covering that area as a COO or a head of ops, you have to put on your finance hat and do a cost benefit and say, is it actually worth at my day rate or my hourly rate, the time I'm spending on this? Because the answer to that might be yes for a period, maybe up to like seed. But beyond that, it just doesn't make sense anymore. The volume of work has exploded. There's a lot of sort of lower level transactional bookkeeping work that needs to be done. You have to outsource that. And then it's almost like, what else is there left to do? What about the business partnering, the FP&A, the fundraising? Finance has kind of different levels to it. And, depending on how much you have on, that dictates who you need to hire and when you need to hire them. So,
Yeah, no, that's actually pretty concise, I think. So like really just kind of recap what you've just said. I think it makes sense. The financial literacy of the management team like plays a big part, because obviously, if you've got a CFO in place, then it's less someone who's financially literate from an accounting background, management consulting background. Obviously, it's less important. Industry, like I think if you're a bank, like obviously you need someone in finance. The kind of the speed of the growth of the company, I guess, is obviously really important. And also, like if you're coming up to a transaction, like a fundraising, for example. So, Julie, have you got anything else to add to that? I guess in terms of like your experience as to what you think could be trigger points for hiring someone.
Yeah, I think same as what Lambro was saying. It comes down to the financial literacy of the people there, but ultimately, I think who is going to be able to understand what the cash position is of the company. So depending again, like on your industry and your business, like how your cash flow works, like is there somebody that really understands that? And if there isn't, then I would suggest that it is really important to get someone in, even if they are part-time. You can come in. I probably would recommend in-house in the sense that you'd want someone who really does understand your business and understand how the cash works between yourself, your customers, and your suppliers. Can help model that out and help explain to yourselves or to management like what is happening with your cash and what your runway looks like basically how much cash do you have until you actually need to raise again. That would probably be like the main trigger point I would suggest.
And what about yourself, Prakash? Anything else to add to that?
No, I think we've pretty much covered it. I mean, the one thing I would say, there's a lot of this is really about the ownership and the accountability, right? So, if you have someone, and we mentioned, Lambro mentioned about the different levels of financial literacy. So when an ops person who doesn't have that financial level of literacy is asked to own, post a seed round or post a Series A round, to own a cash balance of X number of £1 million or dollars or whatever it might be, it becomes very hard then for them to own that and be accountable for it if they don't actually know what they're doing properly. So I think there is a level there of actual, I don't know if it's the right word, but it's like a level of honesty there, and actually within the business itself. But actually say, look, you've tasked me as an ops person to do this. Is it an ego thing? Is it a question of can I actually do this? Because if Lambro, myself, Julie, we've all had years of training, at least a minimum of 3 to 5 years of training in being accountants and in being finance professionals. So, there comes a point where you have to kind of just go, well, look, we're going into areas that I really just don't know and understand. In the same way that I might say, well, if I'm going into psychometric testing, I just don't know it and I don't understand it, and I would expect an HR person to go and do it. Or if I was going to if I was asked to code in React, I would just have to say, I don't know how to code in React. You can't put that on me, right? Because I just don't know how to do it, right? And so, I think there's that level of ownership and accountability, and just almost self honesty of actually saying, well, look, I can't do this. I think we need to look at hiring a finance person. And then when that happens, generally speaking, I think in startups at least, people appreciate that level of openness within the business.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense as well, because like definitely at the sort of like when things are a little not as complex, like I actually generally tell people that if you can do it yourself, do it yourself. If you feel confident doing it yourself, go for it. Like I suspect there'll be some ops people here who actually have got quite strong analytical background, coming from consulting or finance kind of background. And in fact, if you feel comfortable, putting together, and modeling out your cash flow, then you know what, go for it, And like what Prakash said, like there will be a point, I'm sure, like you would find that, oh shit, I really don't know the answers. And actually it will make more sense for the business and personally as well to invest in a finance team so that you can learn from them and to scale with them basically. So then you can concentrate on what works really well for yourself and take it from there, I guess. And I guess kind of following on from that, so the question about when to hire a finance person. So naturally, a common alternative would be to hire an accounting firm, right? Again, for smaller firms, that could work really well. So I know Julie said, it's really important to hire someone, if part-time, but someone in-house, so they can understand the context. So, and I think, I mean, at Quantico, for example, we talk about this quite a lot, I guess, when is it right to hire an accounting firm? When is it right to hire an in-house person, part-time, full-time? And I know that both Lambro and Prakash are both portfolio CFOs, I guess. So, what have you seen in the market? Like when does someone need someone part-time? When does someone need someone full-time? What skill sets? So it's kind of a big loaded question, but like, let's start with Lambro to just kind of get your initial view on this.
Yeah, I've actually come into two businesses now where when I joined, they were already outsourcing the kind of bookkeeping and basic compliance stuff like VAT returns. And yeah, I guess in my experience, you know, obviously I can only comment on the firms I've worked with, and I'm not going to kind of name any names in this session, but I haven't worked with Quantico for the record. Yeah, I think they're doing a reasonable job, but I think as the complexity of the business started to scale and scale rapidly, I think the quality of their output started to diminish. And I guess it's quite a simple equation, really. If they're putting a similar or slightly higher amount of resource onto the job and the business is like doubled in size, then clearly, you know, you're not going to get stuff posted to the right GL accounts. And that's when it does pay to have somebody in the business who really understands, you know, how the business works, the strategy, the budget, and they have that kind of tribal knowledge that an outsourced person could never be expected to have. But there are definitely kind of cases I'm aware of where the outsourcing companies continued all the way through to Series B and they're still going, but they're supporting a bigger finance function, right? So they're probably retaining, you know, a responsibility for sort of transactional bookkeeping and maybe the payroll, but I doubt they're doing like the FP&A, for example. So yeah, I guess those are probably my main points on that.
Yeah, so basically what you're saying is like accounting firms, like work with them if you want to get your compliance sorted, I guess. Because actually the compliance element, like if you don't know about it, like
that's it.
You might miss the deadlines.
It's the blind spots. It's the kind of unknown unknowns that you couldn't possibly know if you're coming at it for the first time. So whether it's you know, a contract FC, contract CFO, or an outsourced firm, like they should be able to point these out to you and help you avoid making costly mistakes.
And Julie, what's your view on this? Like, have you, in your kind of startup roles, I guess, have worked with an external accounting firm, or has everything been pretty much in-house?
We've used outsourced firms before as well, and I think simply like depending on your speed of growth, that will impact things quite a lot because, like Lambro alluded to, I think if they've got quite steady work and, you know, you can take the time to have them come in, spend some time in the office, train them on their product and the business and things like that. And they'll have that understanding. They'll be able to deal with your finances quite effectively. If you then start to grow quite rapidly, like new products every quarter, or just changes and like fundraisers every 6 months or something like that, that's when it gets more difficult for an outsourced person to keep up with all the changes in the business and then to be able to effectively deal with them. So I'd say that's probably where the break point is like where you spend more time catching up someone external than it takes for them to just like do the work. Yeah, that's what I found in the past was just like, that's when it got basically unsustainable. And then the in-house team started having to pick up the work that was the outsourced team was supposed to do because the outsourced team couldn't keep up. And we couldn't get more hours from the outsourced team because they were obviously managing so many customers or clients on their side. That's the point at which we decided to bring it in-house and just hire internally.
Great. And Prakash, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty much agreed with what the guys have said. I think it's a function of, you know, the number of people you have, the size of the business, the rate at which it's growing, and the complexity of the business. So, sorry, a lot of the outsourced accountants are very, you know, they're very good for a small business, and they're very good for a small business that isn't very complex. But once you start to show, like, you know, the supernormal growth patterns, or you start to have additional complexity, where you're dealing with people you're dealing with setting up businesses in new jurisdictions, dealing with, you know, consolidations that are like group consolidations, which are, you know, where you've got, let's say, I don't know, different countries, like let's say you've got a consolidation in the US, you've got numbers coming in from Germany, you've got other European nations, you've got Asian nations coming into this consolidated group. At that point, you just go, you know, the guys who are outsourced accountants, and you know, no disrespect to them, they have a role to play, but they cannot devote the level of resource and time that an internal full-time person can do that. So therefore, you know, you're starting off small, you're outsourcing all of the basic simple functions. As you start to grow, and as you start to grow internally, again, with numbers of people, you want to start to specialize out in your finance area as well as in your, you know, with your tech stack, with your product guys. You know, the CTOs have got to be focusing on running all this kind of stuff. The CFO has got to be focusing on, or the COO or whatever has got to be focusing on running this team. And as you get more complex, as you get bigger, and as you start to grow faster, that's when you really have to go down the route of hiring someone a specialist person, not necessarily full time. And this is the key: is that in terms of focusing on budgets and in terms of saving resource and money, yes, we will. You can upskill yourself, but it will take time. If you're going to do the right thing by the business, the right thing is usually to hire the person who can do it best. And that is inevitably going to be a specialist finance person. So I would always err on the side of hiring a temporary resource early that will then enable you to upskill to be able to do the processing and the systems, the transactional stuff if you want to. Outsource to a set of accountants, but then upgrade and get someone in-house, a finance controller or a contract CFO, to run that finance team.
So just to chip in on that, one consideration might be cost, because I think these guys, the starting packages are really quite economical. You might pay £300 a month for a pre-seed startup with very few transactions. So I think at that point it probably does make sense to kind of use them over a part-time resource. And also, they have the kind of breadth and depth of the internal network in the firm to kind of escalate queries to if they don't know the answers on the spot. So that has to be worth something. But I kind of tend to agree with Prakash that there comes a point where it does make sense to flip that and actually bring in this resource to help you start building internally.
Great. I guess just to kind of summarize from that, really, so it's not that different, I suppose, the kind of trigger points for hiring someone in finance and also for when you might outgrow an accounting firm. I think we've all worked with accounting firms before, and yeah, there's definitely a place for them for sure. They're great for like compliance, but not so great at understanding the business and actually growing with the business and becoming quite embedded. And actually, there's what might make sense. I mean, I think a lot of I'm sure there's a lot of you out there who are pretty cost conscious, as I can imagine, definitely in this current climate. And obviously, if you're cost conscious, you want to be a bit more. You probably don't have the budget, I suppose, to hire someone full time. And I would also err on the side of maybe hire someone part time first to begin with. Either hiring a contractor or hiring their people part time basically, and then take it from there. And that way you have that way you have someone who can kind of work with you basically rather to kind of grow that finance team as and when required. Okay, so kind of moving on to the kind of next bit that I wanted to kind of discuss actually. So we talked a little bit about hand it off to the finance teams, when things get a bit more specialized. But there's a lot of, but this is after all a webinar for ops people, and ops people are really keen to hack finance, to learn more about finance. So I'd like to kind of get a quick view, from you guys on what do you think, I guess, are the basic finance thing that ops people need to know? If sure, there's bits that definitely the finance team can kind of obviously have the years of experience to do that, but at the same time I'm sure they would love to be able to hear from you guys as to what is essential, I guess. So to start with, Lambro, what have you got to say on that bit?
Yeah, so I think they absolutely need an understanding of accounting fundamentals. What is bookkeeping? What's accounts payable? What's accounts receivable? How does a bank rec work? Doesn't mean they need to go and do it, but they should have an overview, sort of holistic understanding. And then I think, even if they're not necessarily running the funding rounds, they should understand how to build a basic 3-sheet financial model, P&L, cash flow, balance sheet. And there's tons of resources out there right now that are kind of giving this to people for free for the period that sort of COVID has got us in its grip. So I can share a couple of links afterwards, but there's a course called Grid Lines that I recommend to everybody to do. And I think in normal times it'd be worth a couple of grand. So definitely jump on it now while it's free. Basic kind of financial model creation, basic understanding of the compliance requirements for your particular business, whether it's VAT, most people face corporation tax returns, and employment taxes, being the basic 3, but there could be a lot of other ones relevant to your industry. And then I guess kind of having a basic grasp of cash flow, working capital management, and also treasury. But they're all pretty big topics. So I'll push on to Julie and Prakash to expand.
Yeah, Julie, have you got anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to say just on the tax point that actually even companies that go to Series B, Series C will still outsource tax. That's just a beast in itself. So yeah, just expect to have to pay for that unless you get lucky with a tax specialist who becomes a finance generalist. But otherwise, yes, similarly, I think the understanding the profit and loss balance sheet and, like I said, cash is really important, your cash flow statements. I would actually suggest, if you can, also speaking to your investors, like they probably have associates in their teams that you could talk to who are very familiar with financial modeling and could help show you how to do them, and the things like the metrics that they find quite important to look at. And then they'll be able to give you the context of like, how do you calculate that in a spreadsheet, as well as exactly why the investor looks at it, why they think that's important, and how they come to those numbers, just across the industry, across their portfolio company. Like that would be quite useful, I think.
And Prakash, have you got anything else to add to that?
Yeah, just a couple of things I would say is just the first thing to do is, as very easy first step is, use your Google Calendar, right? So understand the monthly cycle, understand the quarterly cycle, understand the yearly cycle. So the monthly cycle is your management accounts and, payroll and all of that, those kind of stuff, and the payroll taxes that come the following month, because that's a very important thing not to forget. You pay PAYE, national insurance contributions. The quarterly stuff, doing the quarterly management accounts, things like VAT, and if you're not on the yearly scheme or if you're not on the monthly schemes or whatever, and then the yearly cycle in terms of, doing the actual report and accounts, and and also on the, I guess, on the quarterly basis, when you have board meetings presenting all that data. So, use your Google Calendar 2 weeks beforehand, put a date in the diary, like, start looking at this, because you miss the deadlines. HMRC is, I mean, obviously not now, but HMRC is going to fine you, right? They don't accept the fact that you didn't know as an excuse. I mean, they might accept that the first time and fine you a small amount, but if you keep missing the deadlines, that's a really important thing to understand. The second thing, I'd guess, get good at Excel, right? Because the core thing that every finance person will ever use, however much you can to do stuff on Xero or you use other subsystems and whatever, get good at Excel. And there's lots of, again, like as Lambro said, there's lots of courses out there. Just search them up. There will be discounts available right now. And I guess the third thing to save yourself time is understand the integrations that you can put in already into the finance system. Things like expenses, things like payroll, things like and outsourcing and all that kind of stuff. And just to reiterate what Julie said, at the end of the day, the cash is absolutely the key factor. So having that Excel skill set to be able to build a model that gives you not necessarily an 100% accurate data point, but it gives you a very, very good idea of when cash is going out. And the thing to do is always take 3 months off that, because give yourself that buffer. That's it.
Yeah. Sorry,
Yeah.
I just had another idea while everyone was talking. So I think the fundamentals of corporate finance as well are really important. So understanding, what is equity, what is debt, how to raise funds, what is crowdfunding, what's a convertible note. I think you have to have a basic kind of oversight of these things, and then understand how they kind of play back into the financials.
Yeah, no, definitely. I was going to say what Prakash said about adding 3 months. Yeah, that's like basically a finance trick to anything. Just like add a lot of buffer and contingency. It's a little trick we don't tell anyone else in the company. Like we just add it to our finance budget and don't share. So you can do that as well. Kind of following on from that, I guess. So Lambro, you mentioned grid lines as like a course, I guess. Is there anything else that people can go to? Anything that you can recommend, like that you've relied upon to upskill yourself in Excel or Google Sheets or anything like that?
I've heard. I think Google is your friend in this scenario. I mean, there's an infinite amount out there you can learn. I think it's just a question of focusing your attention on it for long enough to actually learn something, and then trying to apply it as soon as possible after you've learned it. I think that's key for it to kind of stick in your brain. I've heard good things about Jolt, which is not necessarily a finance major, but it has finance modules, and it's almost like a kind of alt MBA for startup people who want to learn on the job. And I know they have 3 or 4 finance modules. But I do actually think there's a kind of like a dearth of good quality stuff out there, and actually something that I was looking at with Prakash and the other guys who run the Startup CFO network that we all run is, can we put out some curriculum and some content to help people upskill? So watch this space.
Great. Julie, what about yourself? Have you got any tools that you would like to share? Educational, I guess, programs.
Yeah, I was going to say something like Google and YouTube, massive helps. As I say, I think Coursera is doing a lot of free courses as well. So they're offering courses from some top universities online for free. They might be a bit technical, but they've got loads of like intro to accounting, intro to finance type courses, and that would be worth looking at.
And Prakash?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm going to reiterate the same thing, because, you know, the thing to do is actually the issue, I think, for a lot of ops people and a lot of people in that world is you don't know what you don't know, right? So, and that's the important thing is, so when you, I mean, go on Google and say, like, you know, what do I want to do in plain English? So how do I do X and in Excel, or how do I do X? And then it'll come up with like Quora responses and like huge numbers of Excel responses. And, you know, at the moment, obviously there are a lot of free courses available, but if you really, really want to hack finance, and from what we've said, generally, I think the feeling is that, you know, you probably want to hire. But if you really, really want to go and hack finance, you know, go and get skilled at Excel and ask the questions of Google. How do I do this in plain English? And the help things will come up. Watch those videos. And unfortunately, there's no real shortcut to doing it in practice. So you have to go and practice them in your own spreadsheets, right? So that's the way it is.
Yeah, definitely. I guess Excel, Google Sheets. I'm actually now a fan of Google Sheets, actually. And on that note, I suppose there's actually a really good blog that I followed, written by this guy called Ben Collins, who basically is a Google Sheet expert. And he goes into great detail about how to be better at it. The reason why I actually prefer Sheets to like Excel is the fact that you can integrate it into Xero. So you can actually pull a live P&L straight into Google Sheets. Whereas with Excel, it's quite static, which means you don't have to like copy paste things basically. So I'm quite a big fan of him. I sign up to his blog basically, and like every so often he sends me like tips on like, you know, how to do things, and I've always learned something new from that. And grid lines, I would love to check that out actually. So if you could share that number later, that would be great. Yeah. And I think to reiterate kind of Prakash's point, I think maybe financial modeling is probably a really good skill to have basically. And the best way to learn it is actually by doing. There's an incredible amount of like free financial models out there in Google, which goes to show how like, you know, like there is no one size fits all. Like you may take a template and you would find that you're going to destroy that template, and that's what you should do. And that's the best way for you to learn. And I do think that like that's probably the only way. Like we probably can't give you like this is the ultimate financial model because it doesn't exist. So you have to go out and build your own financial model for your own business, because only you would understand like what the drivers are and what the key cost and revenue drivers are.
Can I just add to that? Yeah, I think I kind of echo that in that you could speak to 30 different modelers and they've all got different ways of modeling, and most people are self-taught. But I think about 6 years ago, I kind of invested in a course that teaches the FAST standard, F-A-S-T, and it's trying to sort of lay down a standardized framework for modeling. So things like, you know, models should be transparent and easy to kind of understand. The idea being that anybody, the CEO can pick it up and actually understand what you've attempted to lay out. Things like, you know, formulae no longer than a thumb length, which is not always that easy to achieve, and, you know, relatively consistent coding and formatting. And I think what it means is, you know, at the end of the process, you've got something that, you know, other people can pick up and understand, but also you can come back in 6 months and work out what the hell you actually meant to do with the model, because we've all been there, right? You create something that's like really beautiful and complex, and within a few weeks, you're like, how did I even create this? It's kind of got its own consciousness. But yeah, I'm all in favor of applying frameworks and sort of standardized methodologies, but I think implementing them in practice can be quite challenging. So that's probably a whole nother session on that topic, to be honest.
Yeah.
Sorry, I have one other thing to add. I mean, there's another course that's called F1, F9, which is like an Excel kind of course. The other thing I would say is to make life easy for yourself if you're going to do that. If you're going to try and build a model, just do something really simple, like try and make your model, the lines in your model and the rows that you have in the model link up to kind of how it looks in your chart of accounts and your management accounts, such that when the management accounts are done and you're published, you just cut and paste them into the model and they just line up beautifully. So like if you have 50 rows in your chart of accounts, have 50 rows in your management accounts or in your model. So with the same headings and the same headline. So then when you cut and paste them in, those then become your actuals, right? So, and then all the formulas will then follow off those actuals, and your if formulas or your lookups, VLOOKUPs, or whatever you're doing, will then seamlessly fit. So you're not having to have an intermediate step between your management accounts and your, I don't know, the zero download that you're doing and the financial model that you're building. So a very simple thing, make those the same.
Yeah, no, I guess we can
connect on that one. Sorry, F1, F9. The guy who ran that actually went on to set up grid lines. So
right.
F1, F9 is actually chargeable. So you're definitely better off going to grid lines. It's the same content for free.
Right.
Brilliant. Thanks for that. We always love a freebie. Great. Thanks very much. I think we're gonna start the Q&A session, I guess. But thanks so much for your inputs there. I think financial modeling is a whole different topic, isn't it? Like we could go crazy talking about best practices, what faux pas we've seen on that. I definitely have a few stories I would love to share on that part. We've got quite a few questions here, so I think it's time for Q&A, I guess. So I'm just gonna read out the questions I've got here. Well, the first question is from Chris Bond. He basically asked about what the best learning resources are. I think we've discussed that, so I'm going to say that that's done now. Peter Grillet has got a question about, if you were being hired, what would be the ideal checklist system spreadsheet? And what would you want to see an ops person can do to make sure that you're set up from day one? So I guess to kind of paraphrase that, I guess, as the kind of first head of finance, first finance hire, what would be the dream, I guess, to inherit? So Lambro, do you want to kick this off?
Yeah, I think you want sort of like comfort that there's some fundamental checks and balances in place, right? So is there a process around month end? Are bank recs being done? If you use Stripe as your payment gateway, do you have good visibility of the Stripe data, and do you understand what's inside the Stripe receivable? And yeah, also comfort that the basic compliance stuff is being done. So you don't want to log into the HMRC account and find there's 3 months worth of PAYE due and then sort of fines accruing. So I think those would probably be some things off the top of my head. I don't know what you guys think, Prakash and Julie.
Yeah, I guess just to summarize, I suppose what you're saying here is you want to be, you want to, like, what you don't want to find is like all these assets and liabilities that you didn't expect, I guess. One of them being HMRC, obviously, and then just generally just making sure that like Stripe's been recognized correctly. I think that's quite a common mistake I see definitely when you're using a payment gateway where the asset and liability isn't quite recognized correctly.
Yeah, and I'd like to see they have a handle on the cash balance as well and where it's trending for at least the next sort of 12 weeks.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I definitely agree with that as well. I've definitely been in instances where, I've come into like a new startup and then realized that they had, what they thought they had in cash wasn't quite what they had in cash. And that's because like things haven't been set up correctly. And that has quite severe repercussions. Julie, do you have anything else to add to that? Yeah,
I guess I would say like understanding that there isn't someone in finance or someone with the finance specialty knowledge. So like, in an ideal sense, you like as a financial controller, I would come in and like everything's set up and makes sense and everyone knows where the cash is. But like, I guess part of the reason you're hiring a financial controller is because there's not someone who can do that quite yet. So I think being really transparent about that and making sure that, in a startup, typically things are on fire, you're busy all the time, you're in meetings, whatever, you don't have time to really train someone up properly. So I think, knowing that you're handing over something that is messy to someone who you want to clean it up means that you should probably take that extra time to invest in training them in terms of like handing over properly and being like, okay, I don't know what to do here, but this is what I have done so far. So at least they have the context of, what you have done, then they can realize what you haven't been doing and therefore like fill the gap themselves. But I think probably like especially like what I've seen as well is I'm not from audit or practice, so I don't have that background, but seeing people who do come from an audit background who get thrown into a messy startup as their first job out of audit, it freaks them out when they see how messy things are. Like, and I've seen people freak out more than not. And so I think, yeah, just spending the time with them to tell them what has happened so far, so they understand, how you have progressed and therefore can fill in the gaps themselves, is important, as opposed to just throwing them in and letting them freak out silently.
Yeah, and I think I can definitely, being an ex-auditor, I guess I've had the opportunity to go into a startup and like basically I wasn't prepared for it. But then, and actually what I would have really appreciated is if the management team would just sat me down and say like, I'm really sorry, but I know this is messy. I know that's messy. Can you just sort this out? Like these are the areas to look at. It gives me at least some confidence that they know what you're talking about. If they can at least articulate to me like the problem areas. But what freaked me out wasn't the messiness of it. What freaked me out was all the things I then found out that they didn't tell me in the first place because they didn't think it was important enough, or they kind of forgot about it. That doesn't fill me with a lot of confidence, I guess. So I guess kind of summarize kind of what Julie said, I guess, like, it's fine for things to be messy, but just kind of make sure you let us know about it, I guess. Prakash, what have you got to say?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the key thing that an ops person can do to make me feel happy, if I was going to be coming in on my first day, is I would love to hit the ground running, right? So if there is a plan there, and I mentioned this before about having a real handle on the yearly cycle, and I'm talking about, going, let's take that back from like, yearly, quarterly, monthly, weekly, like, maybe a cash flow forecast. So, where we know what monies are coming in when, and we know what monies are going out when. And this doesn't have to be really complicated. It can be an Excel spreadsheet, right? You can have a top line saying, cash in. And if you have a secondary sheet with, I don't know, let's say you're a SaaS business on a yearly contract and you have accruals, so you're basically breaking that cash payment in that's coming, let's say 120,000 into 10,000 pound payments. And that's the kind of money that you're expecting to, if you're getting that money in, then you're kind of having the ability to understand the cash that's coming in and being able to move that into like an accounting concept of spreading that income over those 12-month periods. Now, the cash part, you can then say the cash is coming in here. I know the cash is coming in on the 12th of the month, but I also know, for example, that my salaries are going out on the 25th. So just a simple sheet that says like incoming, outgoings. And then you have a list of all of your suppliers, whether it be Gmail, whether it be the Google Suites, whether it be AWS, whether it be anything like that. So if I was to come in and I was to look at that, I would gain comfort that all of these things are covered. Yeah. And that's really important. And I think also, having someone who had already looked at, it may not be the right answer, but having someone who's already looked at the ways to integrate APIs into the finance system and into the business. Yeah. So if there had been some time spent thinking about what might save time effectively. So spend the time up front thinking about what's going to save you time in the future, and that is the biggest investment that you probably will be able to make in the business. And we talked about the simple stuff like, using a system like Receipt Bank. If you're using something that, like, I don't know, QuickBooks, do you need to be upgrading to Xero? How fast do you grade? Because after like a few X thousand transactions a month, Xero starts to crash. So, do you need to move up to a NetSuite kind of system? So all of that, if you've done that thinking, and I've come in as a CFO, I'm going to be incredibly grateful. Thank you. Really grateful that someone has done this, and that I'm coming into a business that I don't have to spend 3 months worrying about. Because if I've come in ahead of a funding round, I don't have to spend 3 months worrying about all the nitty gritty sort of like crappy details. We can get on and talk about fundraising. Yeah, we can talk about the strategic stuff. We can talk about the due diligence. We can talk about the investors, and you can give me that freedom of time to actually get into the parts of the business that I'm supposed to be really helping with.
Great. I guess just to summarize all of that for everyone, I guess. So what I heard from Lambro was like, making sure that, like if there's a process in place, like an understanding that there's a month-end process in place and having a very clear understanding about assets and liabilities, basically. And then kind of following from that, what Prakash said about, like the fact that actually just having a cash flow forecast is just so important. And like the fact that you've already kind of taken the time to do it just gives, the first finance person so much more confidence that like the company isn't going to go bankrupt in 6 weeks time. And then kind of finally to Julie's point, like, like it's fine. Things can be messy. Just let us know. Just don't let us find out, I guess. If you let us know ahead of time, we know like that you've already taken the time to consider this, and you know, like you've given us kind of like the you've kind of given us permission to kind of like dig into it a bit deeper as well. Cool. And then the follow-up question, another question, I guess, from Chris Bond, who's asked, what is your ideal tech stack for managing the finance function, or just generally what software do you guys use and have used quite a lot? So Julie, I guess to start with, what do you use at WeGift? What have you used at Monzo? And yeah, what would you recommend?
Yeah. So I'd say the core thing that everyone should definitely have is the finance system, like your general ledger account. So if you have outsourced accountants, they'll have their own systems that they use, and you'll just leverage that with them. So for most of the smaller companies, Xero will be your go-to. It's very user-friendly, very seamless to use. I think we've all used it here. So it's quite nice. I think following from Xero, then it depends really on, how much you want to automate through systems. So you might have, say, Receipt Bank that helps to OCR your invoices in. You can have a app that does an invoice approval workflow, and all these systems can integrate together, so the information flows from one system to the other. Things like Expensify are quite common, where employees can submit their expenses, like take a photo of it, put in the data around the expenses it submits. You can have someone in the company approve it, and then again, all the information flows into your accounting system. And I think another thing that a lot of people are finding useful lately are the prepaid company cards. So things like Soldo, Pleo, Spendesk. You basically just load company cash onto cards, give it to certain individuals that obviously can be trusted with it. And again, you'll have a centralized platform where as people spend money, those transactions will come through your central platform, and then you or the finance person can do the accounting or admin. A lot of them are starting to integrate with Xero and accounting systems as well. So again, the information should all essentially get centralized into your accounting system.
Great. Lambro, have you got any other tech stack that you're currently using that Julie hasn't quite mentioned yet?
No, I've got one point on Xero in that, just to counter Prakash's point, I think Xero is probably more scalable than people give it credit for. I think when you start trying to load individual transactions into it, I think that's when you get unstuck. But I mean, a lot of people use it, up until like Series B, but they have to sort of take aggregate level data and then post it back into the system. You can't. I wouldn't recommend plugging it into Stripe, even though there is an integration. So yeah, Xero works pretty well. HubDoc's now available for free, which is great. So sorry, Receipt Bank, but I don't know what that does for your business. So yeah, don't pay for that if you don't need to. And then I've just started using Pento because I was using an outsourced payroll bureau who I wasn't particularly happy with. So I'll be able to report back on those guys at a later date. But essentially, it kind of gives you a funky, like Charlie HR style interface for running payroll, and there's no more kind of going back and forwards between yourself and the bureau, and it might be wrong 2 or 3 times before you actually get it to completion. You're essentially kind of running it yourself, and the system does a lot of the heavy lifting for you. And they also have out-the-box integrations with all the main pension providers as well. So again, it sounds great. I'm going to trial it for the next few months, and I can report back. Beyond Pento, I think the other kind of plugins and integrations I have dabbled with, things like Fluidly for cash flow, but I mean this was a couple of years ago now, so I'm sure they've moved on a lot. But at the time, for me, they just weren't quite matching up to Excel. Nothing has matched for me the sort of flexibility and the dynamic nature of Microsoft Excel. The person that cracks that nut is going to be very rich.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think, financial modeling and like cash flow forecasting, I think with the current kind of app suite is suitable, but only for very simple cases. So it does work. I've seen it work really well for because you can basically add a planned date to pay in Xero, and that links quite nicely into Fluidly, I think. And that shows you a very good idea about what your cash outgoings are looking like for the next 6 weeks or so. It's when you have when you want to project 3 months ahead or 6 months ahead, suddenly that just collapses. So it's good for simple cases, I guess. I think that's the simple kind of assessment as it stands. And Prakash, have you anything else that you wanted to mention besides what?
No, I think those guys. One of the things to consider is that everyone looks at these things, and as Lambro said, this is about removing the heavy lifting, so you can actually do the the second derivatives kind of thought process. So the easy transactional stuff, the processing stuff needs to be done by a system. We're working in startups. We're supposed to be tech companies. We're supposed to be tech enabled, right? If you're doing anything manually, well, sure, you need to be doing the second derivative thought process, which is the sort of the added value thinking. The simple stuff, get a system to do it. Now you're talking, if you're looking at cash flow, there's also Fluidly, there's Float, there's Futurely, there's all of these stuff that's out there that you can use, and you're spending a little bit of money. Now the question is if you're spending a little bit of money, that budget is well spent, because what you're doing is you're saving yourself time and you're saving yourself worry. Once you've set up the system properly, that saving of time will allow you to go and do the added value stuff that the business really needs, right? So all of the crap, get it out of your head, right? So, get a system, whether it's Pento for payroll, where it does the heavy lifting, whether it's, Futurely, whether it's Xero, whether it's, getting a bank feed that feeds into Xero, getting an expense system that works for your business. All of these things exist now and you should have them. Yeah, so spend the small amount of money that allows you to focus on what your real job is.
Great. Okay, definitely agree with all that sentiments, and thanks for sharing all the different tools out there. And in terms of I guess you mentioned HubDoc being free. I have used it and I think it works all right. I think Xero took a while to integrate it, but it does actually work right now. So go for it because it's free. Basically, it's the way, HubDoc's trying to kill Receipt Bank, basically. That's what they're trying to do. Xero being the most popular add-on on Receipt Bank being the most popular add-on in Xero right now. So I'm sure they have been searching for ways to kill Receipt Bank. So HubDoc being one of them. But besides HubDoc, there's also a few others out there, but definitely look into them. Great. So next question I've got is from Anna Swift. So kind of directed to Prakash, I guess, in a way. So you mentioned that, Prakash, one of the mistakes that you've had to unpick as the person, you mentioned mistakes that you had to unpick basically as finance person number one. What do you think are the common pitfalls for ops people leading finance, and what advice have you got for these people, other than hiring a specialist?
Sure. Okay. Yeah. No, other than hiring a specialist. So let's assume you're not going to do that in the first thing. I think you need to, and I've come back to this several times. Is to just make a plan, right, and understand what's coming up in the future and when you have to deal with it. So that's the key thing that you have to do, and understand. And this is going out, let's say 12 months, and just put it in on a monthly reminder, put it on a weekly reminder, put it on a 3 monthly reminder. Even simple stuff like, when do I need to collect information from which department for the board meeting, right? Because you do not want, and the number of times I've seen people and myself, the night before the deadline for a board meeting, everyone's working really late trying to get this information, the marketing data, this data, that data, whatever it is, the funnels, the pipelines, all of the stuff that you're trying to collate from all of the other parts of the business, have a plan. Very, very simple. It doesn't matter, the plans can change, but have the basic plan in place. And I think that's the key to saving yourself a hell of a lot of time. Now, if you may not know, when things are due, but if you're outsourcing stuff, then fine, let those guys deal with it. But if you're in charge and your accountability is the finance function, then you've got to know when all these deadlines are and you've got to hit them, because there's nothing like, if a CEO is getting an email from HMRC saying, your PAYE is late, you're going to get fined. No one wants to see that. You don't want to be on the bearing the brunt of that, outburst or whatever it's going to come as a result of it. So, 3 words: have a plan.
Just to add to that, I think you don't necessarily need to go out and hire somebody from day one, but why not find a friendly, willing CFO and just grab them, 30 minutes, and I'm sure they'll chuck you a freebie, and you can sort of just give them an overview of the business, and they can just throw some thoughts at you in terms of, areas I would focus on if I was in your position. So I would always advocate getting us almost like a mentor or an informal advisor, particularly if you're brand new to this.
Sorry, yeah, I agree, Lambro. I mean, the fact is that, we are on the Ops Stories, Slack. Yeah, so there's a finance channel on there. If you have a specific problem that is an issue, stick it on there, and then I've actually answered quite a lot of questions on there. So, go on there, ask the question from the Ops Stories channel, and it will. I think I don't know how many people are on there from Oslo. I think Lambro's on it. I'm not sure if you're on it, Julie, but there's oh sorry, okay, there's like at least 4 or 5 finance people on there who actually have, who will have, if not the answer that you want, they will. We know how to get the answer that you need.
Definitely. Cool. And Julie, have you got anything to add to that as well?
I think, yeah, like as much as you can find advisors, like going through these network groups and talking to people, because I do the same. Like I've taken over the people function recently, and I just reached out to all my ex-colleagues who look after people and talent and hiring and things like that. Just got 1 hour phone call downloads from them, and that's always most helpful because you can get more customized advice that way as well, depending on your business, your industry, what stage you're at.
And I guess that's what we did as well when we both kind of went through the process of migrating to NATIS, right? And we actually then
pretty much
ended up using our developers, like receipt-based developers and Monzo's developers to chat, because actually they've kind of gone through similar processes. And I'm guessing that's why like everyone's in this Ops Stories community as well, so that you can kind of share that knowledge. Cool. The follow-up question from someone called Wintermute, don't think that's a very pleasant name, but when a need arises to outsource a more robust corporate finance function, what are some processes or pitfalls you can share? So Prakash, have you got anything to say to that?
Yeah, sorry. So the pitfalls and the process. If you've got a robust function already, you probably don't need to outsource it, right? So outsourcing is really a simple thing if you don't have the skill set or the time to be able to do it yourself. Now, the process and pitfalls are, as we've mentioned before, the issue that you'll always have is the accounting firm that you choose will not have the ability to understand the business like people who are inside the business. And it's a huge downfall in the sense that, when invoices come in and receipts come in, and so not just necessarily receipts, but payment stuff comes in, allocating it to the right category and the right category on your chart of accounts in the general ledger. When invoices come in, knowing what to do with those invoices. Is this invoice for 1 month? Is this invoice to cover 3 months and then needs to be split into 3? All of this stuff. So, you need to be on top of the numbers yourself. You need to understand, which bits go into which sections. And then, when you then summarize those management accounts, either for the board or the actual raw data into those management accounts, you need to be on top of anything that's changed. So, if you see, for example, 1 week, 1 month, the rent number is 10,000 and the next month it's 15, you want to be able to ask that question. Why is that rent amount 15? You go into it, oh, there's an account there that's been put in there. So you need to really have that understanding. And if you're outsourcing it, these guys are going to make mistakes. They're only human, but they won't understand your business like you do. And therefore, be on top of it and, at least supervise or understand your own business and understand your own account system.
Great, thanks. Just in the interest of time, I guess, because we obviously have about 5 minutes left or so. So I'm going to try to collapse the next few questions we've got. So we've got a couple of questions here from George, and his questions are more around just kind of how can an ops manager work quite closely with a finance manager, and then figuring out what the split of responsibilities between the two are. Like, have you got any views to share on that, I guess? Lambro, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, I guess, I guess it's about establishing a regular cadence of meetings. So they want to be speaking at least kind of once a week or possibly more, depending on, the business. And I think if assuming that the ops manager was there as the kind of predecessor and they brought in the finance person, then I guess it's a question of, gradually kind of offloading the finance related tasks to allow the ops person to focus on doing ops. So I imagine that would probably take the first sort of 3 to 6 months of that relationship. And then I guess beyond that, I guess it's forming really kind of tight-knit bonds related to the ongoing operations of the business. And it depends how the business is set up, their data function. In many businesses, finance are the custodians of the data, and the ops person might therefore be relying on the finance person to provide, at the very least, financial level data, but possibly a much broader basket of data. So, we went through this at Wonderbly. We went from being a bit of a, we provide the data to actually implementing a BI team quite early on. And then they kind of democratized the data and they provided it directly to all departments. And then the ops finance relationship became more of a kind of business partnering thing, working through kind of strategy, commercial issues, which is what the crux of the relationship should be, right? It shouldn't be one person providing data to another.
Yeah, no, definitely. Julie, what about your experience from working with ops, and like what are the kind of roles, I guess, that get split between the two?
Yeah, I say like over time, like, I mean, finance will deal with more finance specialist things, so around the accounting, the management reporting, financial modeling, budgeting, those kinds of things. I think operations deals a lot more with more sort of like product operations. Could be like business operations if you're looking at things like, you know, office management and things, but a lot around like, you know, what happens with the product after it's released and how you deal with customers and customer services, customer support, account management type stuff. So I think that those will just like naturally start to split. But again, I think going forward, there's so many common themes around how to scale. Like both areas look after things that can be quite transactional. So like just looking at your systems, figuring out how to scale together and like sharing those strategies is really quite useful. Yeah.
And Prakash, what have you got to add to that?
Yeah, actually, funnily enough, I prior to this call, I actually looked up online. You know, it's a very simple third thing of like, what does an ops person do at a startup? And there's a fabulous thing on there's a Quora response. On Quora where it says like, you know, it's like a toilet. How much do you know about the magic that happens post flush? And it says the plumbing, the sewers, the water disposal, and very little, right? So that is operations. It's the part of the business that happens behind the scenes that makes sure that the shit keeps running, right? So that was I looked it up, and I think that's what ops do, right? Ops make the business run. They run all those parts. Finance and ops, again, as we said right at the beginning of this, are quite intrinsically linked in the sense that finance has to have its fingers in every single pie. And in the same way, ops has to have its fingers in every single pie. And in the same way that, you know, legal has its fingers in lots and lots of pies. And that's the beauty of being in a startup, is that, you know, everything you do on a daily basis can make a very significant and substantial change to the business. So, you know, when you're looking at these questions, I think the answer to that is that, you know, there's no real. I can't give you a definitive answer to that, because every business is very different, and every business in every single stage is very different. So, you know, if you're an e-commerce business, the ops people will be doing different stuff, and the finance people will be doing different stuff. Sure, it's all related to money, but the way they interplay with each other will be very different in each different business and in each different stage of that business. So yeah, I'm not really sure that's a very good answer, but it's the one I've got.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you as well, because you're right. As in, like, I think ops people generally struggle as well. What is it that we do? Like you know, and what ops people do differ quite dramatically in what industry, and lead to finance as well. Definitely. Okay, we are almost out of time. I think I'd like to just get one more question answered though. Just a quick one sentence for all of you. I think it's a good one to end on. But like, what language can finance and ops speak, and like, and like, how can I guess ops people speak in the same language as finance? I guess just a quick one sentence if you've got anything to share. So, Lambro, have you? I'll kick off with you first.
Yeah, I mean, let's make an effort to kind of learn the basics of each other's language so we can actually conversate.
Definitely. And what about you, Julie?
Yeah, I think using layman's terms on both sides is important. And another thing, talking to people from different functions, is like when you say a word that is actually a common word, but in your function has a specific definition, just stopping to explain what it means to the other person, and vice versa, just challenging each other when someone says a common word, but it's obviously used in a technical sense for them.
And Prakash?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, from a finance perspective, you know, if you're talking to me, get financially literate. Yeah, simple as. You know, I don't know what that entails necessarily, but all the stuff we've talked about, go and do it, and then come and have the conversation. Yeah, and I feel like definitely the theme here is like, just make sure you know what the cash position is. I think is probably a good place to end on. So like, if you didn't listen to the whole webinar, and you don't know what finance does, well, we take care of the cash, and we make sure that we know how that cash is going to be used in the next few months, so that you get paid.
And I think similarly as well, like ops is obviously very linked to that. And I think that's quite a good note to end on. So thanks very much, Judy, Lambro, and Prakash for taking the time out to share your experiences. I hope it's been useful, and I'll leave it to Osrina now to kind of wrap it up.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Ju-Vern. And, thank you so much for our amazing panel today. Julie, Lambro, Prakash, thank you so much for sharing your experience and insights and advice. And to be honest, so this is our inaugural event with Operations Nation, and we couldn't have hoped for a better company for this. So really, really appreciate you. And for everyone who is still on this call, I guess, a couple of people left for dinner, but this event is recorded, so we will be uploading it eventually when we get the time to edit all the preparation that we did in this call, because those who came here early could have peeked behind the scenes of us kind of like figuring out exactly how to do this panel. So thanks for everyone who's still here. Your commitment is real. We know that it's an amazing day outside your window. So, hopefully you'll be able to go and enjoy that. I'm just going to launch a quick poll for you. I don't know if you can see it. If you can leave us some feedback, that would be amazing. We love radical candor. So if you liked it, if you didn't like it, just let us know. This is the first of the series of 5 events, and we would love to do better and better and better each time, so that all the operations people who are in here can get access to content that is super, super specific for us all. And yeah, we'll keep our chat open for a little bit in case anyone wants to say anything or connect with us. So feel free to use that. And once again, thank you all so much. Thanks for our panel. And we'll be announcing our second event very soon. And yeah, we appreciate everyone on this call. Enjoy your evening.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.